Welcome, I am Christopher. In this episode, we look at 7 fatal wildlife encounters across the African continent. From a family on a traditional Mokoro in the Okavango Delta, whose boat never left the shallows, to a family on the Rufiji River inside the Selous Game Reserve in southern Tanzania, where the morning run came around a bend and the pod had moved. But for now, we'll jump into the last moment of a family in the safari. It was September 11th, 2017, inside an unfenced wildlife corridor in the Limpopo province of South Africa, where the late dry season had reduced the bush to pale, open ground. The grass was low, the air carried dust and heat, and the afternoon light pressed flat across the land. It looked quiet. It was not. The Mensah family had traveled from Accra, Ghana, for a milestone trip, a combined celebration of a 40th wedding anniversary and the retirement of the family's eldest son from military service. There were 6 of them: Bernard Mensah, 67, the patriarch; his wife, Adwoa, 64, their eldest son, Kofi, 42, the retired soldier; Kofi's younger sister, Efua, 37, Efua's husband, Nana, 39, and the youngest, Kwame, 22, Bernard and Adwoa's last born, fresh out of university. The guide who collected them that morning was not licensed. He operated through informal referral networks, offering prices significantly below what registered operators charged. He owned a vehicle with no radio, no emergency beacon, and no dispatch contact. The family had not asked for credentials. The price had felt like a win. By mid-afternoon, the guide had parked near a dry riverbed, known to concentrate wildlife at dusk. What he had not accounted for was a resident lion pride, 4 adults and 2 subadults, that had expanded its range southward following a territorial shift earlier that season. The pride had grown accustomed to vehicles at distance. They had no tolerance for people on foot. African lions are the second largest big cat on Earth. Adult males in this region exceed 400 pounds and can reach speeds of 35 miles per hour in a burst charge. From a standing start, a lion covers 30 feet in under 2 seconds. The gap between recognition and physical contact for a person standing in open ground is not closable by any meaningful action. At approximately 5:10 in the afternoon, Bernard asked the guide to stop so he could photograph a herd of impala near the riverbank. The guide stopped. Bernard stepped out. Adwoa followed. Kofi moved around the rear of the vehicle. Efua and Nana stepped down together on the passenger side. Kwame remained half in, half out, 1 foot on the running board. A male lion had been lying motionless in a dry channel bed, roughly 65 yards out, fully concealed beneath the scrub. It stood without warning. What followed was not a single strike. It was a coordinated response. The male closed on Kofi and Bernard at the rear of the vehicle. 2 females swept wide toward Adwoa and Efua on the opposite side. The guide, from the driver's seat, gunned the engine and pulled the vehicle forward, separating it from the group entirely. Kwame fell back into the cab as the vehicle lurched. He and the guide were the only 2 not standing on open ground when contact was made. A passing ranger unit, alerted by radio from a licensed safari vehicle approximately 440 yards away, reached the scene within 11 minutes. What they found required warning shots to drive the pride off. Bernard and Kofi were deceased at the scene. Adwoa, Efua, and Nana were airlifted with critical injuries. Efua did not survive surgery. Adwoa and Nana survived, but sustained injuries that required months of hospitalization and multiple reconstructive procedures. Kwame was physically unharmed. The guide was taken into custody. Investigation confirmed he held no guiding license, no public liability coverage, and no emergency communication equipment. The booking platform through which the family had found him was flagged for operating without operator verification. I think about this case often, and what stays with me is how the math of it was already set before anyone stepped out of that vehicle. 6 people, open ground, dusk, lion territory. That combination doesn't leave much room. The pride did exactly what a lion pride does. The guide created the conditions, and the family trusted him. That trust was the real failure here, not the lions. While the dry riverbed in Limpopo had taken 2 members of the Mensah family in a matter of seconds, the slow waters of the Okavango Delta would soon show that Africa's most patient predators don't need speed to claim their own. It was June 4th, 2016, in the Okavango Delta of northern Botswana, where the wet season had flooded the flat lowlands and turned the landscape into an intricate maze of shallow channels, reed beds, and lily-covered water that stretched in every direction without a visible horizon. The air was heavy with moisture, and the papyrus along the banks stood thick enough to block any clear view of what moved through it. The Osei family had traveled from London, where they had lived for 12 years after immigrating from Ghana. Father Kweku, 46, was a structural engineer. His wife, Abina, 43, had taken a sabbatical from her nursing career to make the trip. Their eldest son, Derek, 17, was between school years. Their youngest, Nana, 14, had never left Europe before this journey. It was a milestone family trip, a return to the continent, booked through a registered operator with a fully licensed guide. The guided Mokoro excursion was considered among the safer activities available in the Delta. A Mokoro is a traditional dugout canoe, pulled through shallow water by a guide standing at the stern. The family was moving toward a raised island for a lunch stop when Abena pointed toward the bank to watch a pair of birds working through the reeds. The guide slowed. The family leaned to look. Nana, seated at the front of the boat, shifted her weight toward the waterline to see better. In that moment, she was less than 3 feet from the surface. Nile crocodiles are the largest freshwater predators on the African continent. Adult males in the Okavango regularly reach 14 to 16 feet in length and weigh between 1,000 and 1,500 pounds. They are ambush predators of extraordinary patience, capable of holding position just beneath the surface for hours at a time with only their eyes and nostrils showing, features small enough to disappear against floating vegetation. To most observers in a boat, they do not register as animals at all. That invisibility is not incidental. It is the entire hunting strategy. The crocodile had been in the shallows beside the reed bank for an unknown period before the Mokoro arrived. It moved once, a single motion, toward Nana, and the distance between its position and her forearm closed before any reaction could form. It seized her and pulled. The Mokoro rocked violently. Abina reached forward with both hands, grabbing for Nana and pulling against the animal's full weight. The guide drove his pole into the crocodile repeatedly. Kweku lunged forward from the rear of the boat. I think this is the moment most people genuinely cannot picture. A mother pulling one direction and a crocodile pulling the other, with the crocodile registering none of it. Not the pole, not the noise, not the chaos of the rocking boat. It simply held and pulled. That is what a Nile crocodile in an established hold does, and there is almost no external force that interrupts that process once it has fully begun. The crocodile did not release through the resistance. It pulled Abina partially into the water before the overturned Mokoro shifted her position sideways against the grip. In the shallow water, without the depth needed to roll or drag with leverage, the animal's hold became awkward. The guide's sustained strikes, combined with the thrashing surface and the changed body angle, were enough to break the contact. Both Nana and Abina were in the water. Derek pulled his mother back to the overturned hull. Kweku surfaced and swam toward his children's voices. The guide continued to strike the water to drive the animal off. Nana was not recovered alive. Abina sustained injuries to her arm and shoulder, requiring surgery and months of physical rehabilitation. Kweku sustained deep lacerations to both hands from the hull and the struggle. Derek was physically unharmed. Investigators reviewing the incident noted the behavioral signature of the attack: no preliminary circling, no visible surface disturbance, an immediate direct strike from a stationary hold position, consistent with a crocodile that had been waiting rather than pursuing. What stays with me after studying this case is that Nana wasn't doing anything reckless. She leaned forward to look at birds. That was the full extent of it. The crocodile had been measuring the distance long before anyone on that Mokoro knew it was in that channel. While the delta's still water had claimed Nana Osei from a boat that never left the shallows, the cold waters off the South African coast would soon show that the ocean operates on the same principle. It was November 15th, 2017, approximately 6 miles off the coast of Gansbaai, South Africa, where the cold Benguela Current meets the warmer Agulhas water and creates one of the most biologically active stretches of ocean on the planet. The water was dark green and cold, with a 2-foot swell that rolled under the hull in a slow, continuous motion. The Callaway family had traveled from Melbourne, Australia, on a 2-week package that combined a Kruger National Park safari with a coastal extension in the Western Cape. Father Marcus, 48, worked in real estate. His wife Sandra, 45, taught primary school. Their son Ethan, 20, was in his first year of university. Their daughter Jade, 17, had been the one who asked for the cage dive specifically. She had watched a documentary on great white sharks 2 years earlier and had told her parents she wanted to see one in the water, not on a screen. Great white sharks are the largest predatory fish on Earth. Adult females, typically larger than males, can reach up to 20 feet in length and weigh more than 4,500 pounds. They hunt using a combination of electroreception, vibration detection, and visual contrast, reading the silhouette of potential targets against the brighter surface from below. From underneath, a cage occupied by people reads as a concentrated mass of movement and contrast against the light. It does not read as something to avoid. The cage was a standard aluminum dive cage, secured alongside the starboard hull by steel clips and a primary retaining rope. Marcus and Sandra entered the cage together for the first rotation, descending approximately 8 feet below the surface, while Ethan and Jade remained on deck. The crew worked the chum line. A large female had been circling the boat for 14 minutes before making her first approach to the cage. The first contact was lateral, the shark's body striking the side of the cage with enough force to rotate it against the hull and snap one of the securing clips. The cage swung outward and down on the remaining rope, tilting sharply and pulling one corner below the intended operating depth. Marcus, positioned near the door latch, was thrown against the door when the cage tilted. The latch, under load from the changed angle, gave way. The door opened approximately 18 inches before the cage's secondary line pulled it short. I think what people imagine about great white shark encounters is a single, decisive strike. What the record actually shows in cage incidents is something more chaotic, a large animal making contact with a structure it cannot identify, sensing mass and movement but not the boundaries of what it is dealing with. That chaos is what made the latch the critical variable here, not the shark's intent, the equipment. Sandra was pulled partially through the opening before Marcus and a crew member hauling the safety line above began working the cage back toward the surface. The cage's altered angle, tilting well off its original axis, made the recovery slow and uneven, the crew pulling against a load that shifted each time the hull rolled in the swell. It took 4 minutes to bring the cage clear of the water. Sandra was extracted through the cage top once it reached the surface. The door was forced closed manually, and the cage secured to the hull. Sandra sustained a fractured collarbone and severe lacerations to her right shoulder and upper arm from the doorframe during the partial ejection. She was airlifted to a hospital in Cape Town and spent 12 days hospitalized before release. She survived. Marcus sustained a concussion and significant bruising from the initial impact inside the cage. Ethan and Jade were physically unharmed, but were both treated for acute shock at the dock. The operator was investigated. A stress fracture in the latch mechanism was identified, consistent with repeated use fatigue that a standard pre-departure equipment inspection should have detected. 2 crew members faced charges related to equipment certification failure. What I keep coming back to in this case is the inspection. The shark did what a great white does near a cage in chummed water. The latch was the failure, and that latch had been showing signs of stress that a proper certification check would have flagged before that family ever entered the water. They trusted the equipment had been cleared. It had not. That is where this one ends up. While the cold water off Gansby had put the Calloway family inside a cage that was never going to hold, the open savanna of Zimbabwe would soon show what it looks like when a family misreads every warning signal an elephant is capable of giving, and the elephant follows through anyway. It was August 21st, 2018 in Zimbabwe, where the late dry season had turned the bush pale and brittle, and the afternoon light came in, flat and hard across the open ground. It was the kind of afternoon where the landscape feels deceptively still, where the heat presses everything into a suspended quiet that makes the environment feel more manageable than it is. The safari group had been moving through the area when the herd came into view ahead, partially in the open, partially obscured by the remaining scrub along a dry drainage line. Thomas Reed, 50, was on safari with his wife Julia, 47, and their daughter Megan, 15. The trip had been planned for over a year, a 25th anniversary gift that Thomas and Julia had given themselves, with Megan joining because they had wanted her to see Africa before she left for university. Their guide had positioned the group at a distance that accounted for the herd's behavior and the open terrain between them. That distance was not where Thomas stayed. He stepped forward to take a photograph, not dramatically, a gradual, incremental movement closer than the guide had placed the group. the kind of movement that feels controlled from the inside and reads very differently from the perspective of an animal that had been monitoring the approach of the vehicle and the people near it long before anyone in the group noticed the herd at all. African elephants are the largest land animals on Earth. Adult males reach between 9,000 and 13,000 pounds, and despite that mass, they are capable of accelerating to approximately 15 miles per hour in a short charge, a speed that covers the ground between an animal and a person faster than most people can process and physically respond to. The lead elephant reacted as Thomas moved closer, ears spread, head raised, body oriented directly toward him. The first charge initiated and stopped short, a mock charge, consistent with documented elephant warning behavior. Julia grabbed Megan's arm and stepped backward. Thomas did not move back with enough speed or distance to register as a credible retreat. The elephant read it as insufficient. The second charge did not stop. Elephants that commit to a full charge after a mock charge has failed to produce an adequate response do not decelerate before contact. The impact was immediate. The elephant's head connected with Thomas's torso and drove him into the ground with force that fractured multiple bones simultaneously. Julia pulled Megan behind a low termite mound as the elephant passed. It turned, ears still spread, head raised, before the guide discharged 2 warning shots into the air. The elephant moved back toward the herd and did not pursue further. Thomas Reed did not survive. He was pronounced dead at the scene. Julia sustained a sprained wrist and bruising consistent with a hard fall. Megan was physically unharmed. I think what makes elephant cases particularly painful to study is exactly that. The warning was present. It was visible. It was textbook. Thomas almost certainly didn't recognize it as a warning. Most people don't. The mock charge looks like a bluff because it stops the first time. By the time the second charge came, he was already inside the margin the elephant had clearly communicated was too close. There was no correcting it from there. While Zimbabwe had taken Thomas Reed in a charge that followed every documented warning in sequence, a safari camp in northern Mozambique would soon show what happens when the smallest gap in the world is left open in exactly the wrong place. It was February 14th, 2017, at a remote tented safari camp along the edge of the Niassa Special Reserve in northern Mozambique, where the wet season had turned the surrounding bush dense and alive. The camp was well run, with a full staff and written safety briefings given to every guest on arrival. One item in those briefings was communicated to every family without exception: zip tent flaps fully at all times. Not partially, fully. The Peterson family had traveled from Cape Town, South Africa. David, 46, and his wife Lisa, 43, had been to the bush before. Their son Caleb, 14, had not. The trip was his birthday gift, his first real safari, planned around peak wildlife movement season. They had arrived 2 days earlier and had seen lions from the vehicle on their first morning drive. Caleb had told his parents it was the greatest day of his life. On the evening of February 14th, the family returned from dinner at the main lodge and entered their tent at approximately 9:45 p.m. Lisa noticed that one of the lower zipper seams near the ground had been pushed open, a gap of several inches at the base of the front flap. She pressed it back without fully resealing the bottom track. The family settled in. The lamp was switched off at approximately 10:15 p.m. Black mambas are the fastest snake in Africa, capable of moving at speeds up to 12.5 miles per hour across open ground. Their venom is powerfully neurotoxic, affecting the nervous system rapidly and progressively, causing paralysis from the extremities toward the respiratory muscles. When cornered or startled in an enclosed space, they do not strike once. They strike repeatedly, with very little interval between each contact. At approximately 2:30 a.m., David sat up in response to a sound he later described only as something that didn't belong. He reached for the lamp. Coiled near the base of the sleeping arrangement, between the beds and the tent entrance, was a black mamba estimated at between 8 and 9 feet in length. It was directly between David and the only exit. I think the decisions David made in the next 30 seconds are worth sitting with. He didn't freeze. He pushed Caleb toward Lisa, told them both to move to the far side of the tent, positioned himself between the snake and his family, and reached for a tent pole to maintain distance. That sequence, in near darkness, with a black mamba between him and the door, takes a specific kind of clarity that most people would not find in that moment. The mamba struck twice, once to his right calf and once to his left hand as he reached for the pole. Lisa unzipped the rear emergency panel, a secondary exit the camp had installed for exactly this situation, and pulled Caleb out into the night air. She screamed for staff. David moved through the rear exit behind them, already feeling the early symptoms: a metallic taste, tingling across his fingers, a tightening sensation in his chest. Camp staff reached them within 90 seconds. The camp maintained a refrigerated anti-venom supply on site, a requirement for wilderness operations of that classification. The medical coordinator administered the first vial at 2:58 a.m. David received 2 vials before emergency transport was arranged. He was airlifted to a hospital in Pemba at 4:15 a.m. David Peterson survived. He spent 6 days hospitalized with residual neurological symptoms in his left hand. Lisa and Caleb were physically unharmed. In Mozambique, the threat slipped silently through a gap in canvas and struck inside a family tent. In Tanzania, days earlier, danger was already waiting beneath the sand itself. It was September 8th, 2015, along the Ruaha River in the Ruaha National Park of southern Tanzania, where the late dry season had drawn the water back to its lowest level of the year and exposed long stretches of pale, sandy bank on either side of the narrowing channel. It was not safe ground, it was nesting ground. The Harrington family had traveled from Bristol, England. Robert, 51, was an accountant. His wife, Catherine, 48, was a secondary school administrator. Their son, James, 23, had just completed a graduate degree. Their daughter, Sophie, 19, was between university years. The trip had been arranged as a combined family milestone, Robert and Catherine's 25th anniversary, alongside James's graduation. The guide who collected them that morning was known locally as a reliable driver, but held no walking safari certification and had no formal training in riverine wildlife behavior during seasonal transitions. Nile crocodile nesting season in the Ruaha Basin runs through the late dry months, when female crocodiles excavate shallow chambers in exposed sandbanks and deposit between 25 and 80 eggs per clutch. Female Nile crocodiles guarding a nest are among the most consistently aggressive animals on the African continent. They do not retreat from perceived threats. They charge them, and they do not stop. Adult Nile crocodiles in the Ruaha region regularly exceed 13 feet in length and weigh between 800 and 1,200 pounds. In a burst from a stationary position, a Nile crocodile covers the first 20 feet faster than most people can register the movement has begun. The guide led the family down a section of bank he had used as a rest stop before, during the wet season, when high water covered the sand and no nests existed. He had not returned to this section since the water dropped. He did not know what was buried beneath the surface at regular intervals along the stretch the family was walking. I think this is the variable most people miss when they try to understand nesting season crocodile encounters. The threat is not visible, it is buried. The eggs are underground. The female may be in the water watching, or lying motionless at the bank's edge in a way that registers as debris or shadow. The family walked through a nesting area and did not know it until the first female charged from the waterline. The first charge came from the right, a female that had been motionless at the water's edge approximately 30 feet from the family's path. It covered the distance in under 2 seconds. Robert was closest. She seized him at the leg and turned a single motion, dragging him toward the waterline. Nile crocodiles do not hold position on open ground. They return to water, and they take what they are holding with them. Robert was at the water's edge before anyone fully understood what had begun. The chaos, the screaming, the group fracturing, the movement pulling in every direction at once, reached the second female 40 yards further along the bank before anyone could regroup. She charged from the left. Catherine moved toward Robert and was struck before she reached the waterline. James pulled Sophie toward the upriver end of the bank, the only direction still open. The guide had already retreated to the vehicle. As the bank narrowed, James turned them away from the river entirely, forcing a path into the tree line through dense brush that dragged at their arms and legs. A third female had charged from the water's edge behind them as they broke from the open sand. She closed on Sophie before James could pull her fully clear. The animal struck once, a single contact at the lower leg before the broken ground and dense brush at the tree line's edge slowed it. Crocodiles do not pursue deep into cover. The trees were enough. The female stopped. James and Sophie reached the vehicle on foot. Sophie sustained serious lacerations and a fractured ankle from the strike. James sustained deep lacerations to his forearm and hands from forcing a path through the brush. Both were evacuated to a hospital in Iringa. Robert and Catherine Harrington were deceased at the scene. The guide was questioned by authorities. He held no walking safari license and no certification for riverine environments. The stretch of bank he had led the family onto contained 11 active nests, identified by wildlife officers during the post-incident survey. The Harrington case shows how quickly familiar ground can become fatal when the season changes. In a reserve to the north, the danger would not stay buried in the sand. It would be waiting beneath the surface of the river. It was March 12, 2018, on the Rufiji River inside the Selous Game Reserve in southern Tanzania, where the wet season had raised the river to its widest reach of the year and flattened the surrounding floodplain into a gray-green expanse of water that stretched from the channel edge to the tree line in every direction. The Marsh family had traveled from Boston, Massachusetts. Daniel, 52, was an architect. His wife Rachel, 49, was a pediatrician. Their son Tyler, 24, had taken time between jobs to make the trip. His parents had offered it as a belated graduation gift. Their daughter Chloe, 20, was between university years. The river excursion had been arranged through the same licensed operator managing their land-based game drives, and their guide, Johannes, held a valid river certification and carried a full safety kit aboard the flat-bottomed aluminum pontoon that served as the reserve's standard vessel for excursions on that stretch of the Rufiji. What Johannes had not completed before launching that morning was an advanced check on the pod's position along the eastern bend. The reserve's operating guidelines required this step following any significant water level change, and the river had peaked 3 weeks earlier. The hippopod that typically rested in the broad shallows of the eastern bend had shifted its position northward as the water moved, relocating to a resting site directly adjacent to the channel the boat would need to use to reach the downstream sandbank. Johannes had not run this route since before the river peaked. He did not know the pod had moved until the boat rounded the bend. The common hippopotamus is the third heaviest land animal on Earth. Adult bulls in the Selous Basin regularly exceed 3,500 pounds. In water, hippos do not swim in the conventional sense. They bound along the riverbed, covering distance with a submerged efficiency that does not read as movement from the surface until the animal is already alongside a vessel. Their territorial response in water is not graduated. A bull defending the pod's resting position does not issue warnings in sequence the way an elephant does. The charge is the warning. At approximately 8:20 in the morning, Johannes brought the pontoon around the eastern bend, and the pod came into view at less than 40 meters. Closer than he had anticipated, in a position he had not expected. He cut the engine immediately. The boat slowed, but continued to carry forward on its momentum. A large bull, positioned at the outer edge of the group, with his body angled toward the approaching vessel, submerged. Johannes had begun reversing the engine when the bull came up beneath the port side of the hull. The impact drove the near side of the pontoon upward and rolled it hard to starboard. Chloe and Tyler, seated on the port bench, went into the river on the first contact. Daniel caught the starboard rail. Rachel was thrown against the engine housing before going over the side. Johannes held position at the tiller as the boat settled, listing sharply but not fully capsized, and reached for the emergency radio. I think what makes a hippo attack in open water different from almost any other encounter in this series is that the water removes the variable most people instinctively rely on in a crisis: the ability to move. On land, even in the worst cases described here, there is ground, there is direction. In a river at depth, with an agitated pod occupying the shallows in every direction, there is only the surface and whatever you can keep hold of. The pontoon gave Daniel a rail to grip. Rachel, Tyler, and Chloe had the river. The bull surfaced and made a second pass at the hull, striking it from the side as Johannes attempted to bring the bow around. The impact drove Daniel clear of the rail. The pod, agitated by the sustained disruption on the water's surface, moved as a group. A cow, positioned between her calf and the open channel, turned toward the nearest movement in the water. Tyler was the closest. Rachel and Tyler did not survive. Their bodies were recovered by wildlife rangers who reached the scene 48 minutes after Johannes' emergency call reached the reserve's dispatch. Daniel was airlifted with a fractured pelvis and deep lacerations sustained when the bull's second strike threw him from the boat. Chloe was pulled from the water by Johannes using the emergency throw line and survived with a dislocated shoulder and significant soft tissue injuries from the capsize. Johannes was uninjured. The investigation confirmed that Johannes had not completed the pre-departure position check on the pod before entering the eastern bend, a step mandated by reserve operating guidelines following any significant water level change. The pod had followed the flood peak and had not returned to its previous position. The channel the boat used had become, without advanced reconnaissance, a direct approach through the pod's resting territory.